called Modern Technology. They're on a really excellent label that are based in Brighton in the UK called Human Worth Records, who press up like limited runs of really, really nice vinyl, and a portion of each release is it goes to charitable organizations. It's a superb label. But yeah, the reason I wanted to talk about that track in particular is because we were talking earlier about just doing what it takes to get that record finished.
Yeah.
So that was part of it was a split single with another band called 72%. And it's a really, really great single. Came out on a beautiful, clear vinyl 7-inch. It was really nice. But that particular track was left over from an album session that the band had done. And they weren't really happy with it. And it just never ended up on the album. And it was recorded by a guy called Wayne Adams, who runs Bear Bites Horse Studio in London. He does a lot of great stuff. And it was mixed by a guy called Joel Harris, who's an excellent mix engineer. But what had happened was they'd got the track, they'd got it into like a pretty good state, and it didn't have any vocals on it initially. And one of the reasons that it didn't make the album is because it was too slow. So they got in contact with me like before the track was even mixed and said, look, can we do anything about this? Because they knew that I was going to be mastering the track at the end of it. They were like, can we do anything about it? Is there any way we can speed this up? And I was like, what? Okay. So I had to play with it and had to muck about with it in RX. And so the process went, it got recorded and it got mixed completely with no vocal. Then I got it, sped it up. And it was quite a lot as well. It was like 5 BPM or something. It was quite a significant amount.
Wow.
And then it went back to them to put the vocal on because it was now at the right speed. And then it came back to me again to get mastered.
Oh my God.
So I just thought it was a really fun track to sort of demonstrate like sometimes being the mastering engineer and taking on the responsibility of like, right, let's get this out the door.
Yeah.
Can mean a bit more than what you might think.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. So
it's crazy, isn't it?
Recorded, mixed, sped up by the mastering engineer.
Yeah.
Vocals tracked. Yeah. Did you mix the vocals into the rest of the record?
No, I didn't. The vocals got mixed in with the track. Yeah. And the result is it came out sounding awesome.
That sounds freaking massive, you know?
Yeah. And you'd never think that there was any sort of mad like speeding up or anything going on.
No, it doesn't. You don't hear it at all. It's so funny. I was listening to an interview with Neil Young, with Rick Rubin interviewing Neil Young on his Broken Record podcast yesterday. And he was talking about a record that was about to be put out that was never put out. And I think it's called Chaos. Maybe it's been put out already since the interview was recorded. I don't think so. Like, this is exactly what I would have envisioned that record will sound like whenever it does come out, this Neil Young thing. So I mean, maybe other than the vocals, right?
Yeah, sure.
I don't think Neil Young would ever do that kind of a vocal thing, but like
he's so good at noise music though, Neil Young.
Exactly. Yeah.
So good at it. Like his command of like feedback and guitar tone and stuff is just like incredible. Like what a guy.
Yeah, the dude's a master. Anyways, it was an interesting interview with so I guess shout out to Rick Rubin and Neil Young for that also. That. But that's just what I thought about when I heard this song. I was like, whoa, this sounds like exactly what Neil Young was describing yesterday in that podcast I was listening to.
Did you watch the Rick Rubin McCartney thing?
We haven't even spoken about the Beatles on the air. So yes, I have.
So good, isn't it?
It was amazing. My buddy Jacob was saying that like a lot of the stuff that Paul McCartney was saying, or a few of the things that Paul McCartney said to Rick Rubin were not like factually true. It's just how he remembered it. But in the end, that's kind of all that matters, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, well, what is that stuff? I mean, it's, he's there. It was
right. Yeah,
it was amazing. It was magic. I loved watching McCartney's like just watching his reaction to hearing some of this stuff, and like almost seeing him going back to the memory. It was just so brilliant, so beautiful. The loveliest moment for me was at the I don't know whether you remember it. It was the end of one of the episodes where Rick Rubin says, and he says something like, "Oh, well, John Lennon, once said about this song, how beautiful and how brilliant this song was," or something like that.
Oh yeah.
And McCartney just goes like, "Oh right, yeah, never heard that before. Never heard him say that." And it was so it was so touching. It was like, it's a really beautiful moment. Like,
I think it was about Here, There, and Everywhere, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, and Paul's like, "Oh, I didn't know that he said that. That's so sweet." Oh,
yeah.
Like,
it was
a friend that he hasn't seen, and he hasn't seen that friend in 40 years, right?
Yeah, so
42 years. Yeah, that was really touching. The other thing that I remember from that documentary was when Rick Rubin just like pulls up the bass line from something, and he's like, "What is this? This is the greatest thing ever."
Yeah.
I was like, so I'm like, as a bass player, I'm like, yes, Rick's in touch. The dude he's so present. It's crazy to see how present a music producer could be. I think Rick embodies that, of like just being fully present with the artist. And also from other interviews that I've heard of him, he just seems like he's able to remove all the extraneous things and just be totally there with the artist he's working with. And you see that in that video, I think.
I don't know. I really don't know very much about him, actually. I mean, I know that I know his work, and I mean, growing up as a metal kid and stuff, I knew that he produced Rain in Blood, the greatest metal album of all time, and and obviously I'm a massive Beastie Boys fan. I know all that that kind of legacy, but I don't really know anything about like him as a person. So it was quite an interesting watch, actually, because I didn't know that's kind of how his his demeanor would be, because he was like, I mean, you would be, wouldn't you? He was just like a kid in a candy shop. He was just so excited about it.
How couldn't you be, right?
I know. I mean, what an amazing thing to have done.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I listened to this. By the time this episode airs, this guy Josh Bonanno's second episode will be live already, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And he turned me on to this interview with Rick Rubin on Lex Fridman's podcast, which was like a really interesting interview. And like he asks him like, "What do you think about death?" Like all these like crazy, like all these like crazy out there questions. And it was really interesting to kind of see that side of Rick Rubin. So I'll put a link in that in the show notes or whatever, or I'll send you the link now.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You can check
that. Yeah,
you could check that out. So that was like an eye-opening interview for me. Yeah, but yeah, he's certainly one of the big ones in the producer department for sure. Yeah, man, the Beatles. You're living it up in the Liverpool, the Source.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
it was McCartney's birthday the other day.
Oh yeah, was it?
Yeah, it's his 80th on Saturday, maybe Friday. Yeah, I went to see Elvis Costello that evening.
Oh, nice.
And he covered "Let Me Roll It," the Wings tune, as like a as like a happy birthday thing. It was cool.
Very nice. Yeah. Well, dude, this has been really, really fun, and we've kind of touched the whole spectrum of mastering. And there was one more thing that I wanted to ask you before we kind of move on towards like the more general side of thing questions that I try to ask at the very end. But sure. Like you mentioned that this was the Sauce segment song was it was for a vinyl release. Do you find that you're getting a lot of vinyl requests, and do you do anything differently when that does happen?
A lot of albums that I do end up going to vinyl. Yeah, because I mean, I work with a lot of sort of DIY and independent musicians and stuff, and it's just like making a piece of vinyl and having something to sell more than anything else is kind of
right.
I think you can make quite a vinyl as a piece of merch is quite a good thing to have, despite the massive problems of actually getting it pressed at the moment.
Yeah, massive problems.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's like half a year or more to wait, right?
Oh yeah, most places are quoting 9 months at the moment.
Right.
It's just it's mad. But But yeah, no, a lot of albums that I do end up going to vinyl. In terms of doing things differently, I don't do anything sonically differently, because I think the things that make a record difficult to press to vinyl, I sort of wouldn't make records. I wouldn't make masters that sound like that anyway. That had like, ridiculous amounts of stereo bass information or really horribly sibilant vocals or anything like that. I mean, that sort of stuff should be addressed anyway, so it's unlikely that it gets there. But the one thing I will do, just because loudness it's pretty irrelevant when you with vinyl, so I'll usually render out another version if there's any more than like a dB or so of limiting. Then I'll render out another version which has hardly any limiting on it at all, just catching the odd peak, just so that it can be pressed nice and loudly and sound great.
Are there do you have like cutting engineers that you recommend, or is that something that you're thinking about?
I do know the odd cutting engineer, like on a personal basis, but more often than not, it's kind of, I'll send people to a plant basically that I know will do a good job. Which I would like to change. I think I would like to kind of get a more personal relationship, I think, with more cutting engineers, and because I mean that's an amazing side of the job that I don't really know much about at all. I met Cicely Balston last year really briefly at a party, and I was a bit pissed. I don't know, I sort of started getting a bit gushy, a bit like, oh my God, what you do is so amazing, and all this sort of stuff.
You're too green.
Yeah, I was just like, oh, it's so good. Oh God, it's easy for me. I just sit there with a laptop and do this, that, but it's so physical and all this sort of stuff. It's possibly a bit embarrassing. But yeah, I'd like to get to the point where I did have kind of go-to like cutting engineers, because I think people would get better sounding records out of me if I had that kind of relationship, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I totally get that. At the same time, I feel like, kind of like you said, I feel like people are mostly there are some people that are hardcore into vinyl and respect all the way, but I think a lot of people would buy it as like a merch piece, and like don't even necessarily have a record player to even play it on, but they want that physical thing that they can keep as like a token. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I buy a lot of vinyl. Like Bandcamp Friday comes around, I go wild. But it's obviously I have a record player and I really love listening to records. But I mean, I'm also really, really busy and I have a toddler. So quite honestly, I listen to the majority of my music through Bluetooth to a little Bose speaker in my kitchen.
Oh man, I feel you. I have a Marantz that my buddy Jacob hooked me up with in the living room, but I'm playing it through a Bluetooth to, hi-fi adapter from my phone via Spotify. So it's not it's not like anything that crazy. And, speaking of toddlers, I wanted to say this also, because we were talking about the Beatles documentaries. Is with Get Back, it was so amazing, but it literally took me 2 months to watch. Because I was like, who's got 8 hours, right? So I literally, my wife went out one night and it's like, oh, cool. And I watched an hour, Yeah. And it's after I cleaned the kitchen, you know what I mean? So by the time I'm who's got 8 hours? But
I know, it's crazy. I mean, films last me a week. It's sort of, everything's done
We're really dating ourselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's I just have to treat everything as a series now, whether it's meant to be that or not.
That's so good, man. I'm with you. Yeah. It'll take us 2 nights to watch a movie. So I'm 100% on that thing. But yeah, if it's just me, then it takes me 2 months. But yeah, totally. Oh, and one more thing, I guess. Now that I'm just my brain is percolating about mastering things.
Yeah,
just in terms of the loudness wars, what are your thoughts on it? Because I know that I've spoken to mastering engineers where it's I wish I could make it louder, but I can't. I can make it not as loud, but I can't. And I've talked to mastering engineers that are just so happy to make it loud. And don't even like think of it as like a